Hello and welcome back to the Glossy Week in Review podcast. I'm your host, senior fashion reporter Danny Parisi, and I'm here with our international reporter Zofia Zviglinska. Hello, Zofia.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm good. How are things in London?
Gloomy today. Although it was nice this morning for like 5 minutes, but apparently
Gloomy in London.
I mean, news today, isn't it? I think we've had a total of like 20 minutes of sunlight in the last 18 days.
Wow. Well, in New York, we have had the opposite. We're in a drought, actually. There was a little bit of rain the other day, and there has not rained in like a month or two, which is not good. Any of our listeners are in the New York area, you probably smelled smoke from the New Jersey wildfires the other day, which is also not good. But you know what? This is not a climate podcast. Sometimes it is, but mostly we will be talking about fashion stuff. To this episode, we're going to be talking a little bit about Amazon finally launched their kind of like Temu, AliExpress, Shein competitor, which they've been talking about for a little while. It's called Haul. So we will talk about that. Later, we're going to talk about just some general developments in the sportswear category from Viore on some of the other brands in that area. And then finally, we're going to talk about Klarna going public, or at least confidentially filing IPO documents, and kind of the state of the buy now, pay later sector of the market. But yeah, let's start with Amazon. We've talked about this. Amazon obviously has felt a lot of pressure from Shein and Temu and these like super low cost websites. Amazon kind of was that to, I think, a lot of other retailers. Like the costs were low and the delivery was so fast and everything that like it put a lot of pressure on other retailers. And now they're feeling that kind of pressure from Shein and Temu. So they have talked a little bit about wanting to do some sort of competitor there. And they finally announced that it's called Haul. It is literally exactly like shopping on Shein or Temu. I browsed around a little bit. Everything's under $20. A big mix. It's not just fashion, although it definitely seems like a lot of apparel. There's all sorts of other random $2 garbage, phone chargers and cases and stickers and all sorts of other stuff. But it's all incredibly, incredibly cheap. The trade-off that Amazon has said is that it's not 2-day shipping. There's no 2-day shipping on Haul. Most things take like a week or more, but the flip side is that it's just ridiculously low cost. So there's a lot of interesting things to dissect here, but did you get a chance to browse around a little bit, Zofia?
Yeah, it kind of still seems mostly just like fast fashion pieces, but I think it's quite interesting because the thing that I've noticed, and obviously, I don't think it's possible nowadays to go without shopping on Amazon for something, is that most of the prices over the last couple of years have gone up quite significantly. It's almost like people are being priced out of Amazon, which is kind of an incredible thing because most of the times Amazon is always like the thing that you go to check if there are cheaper prices, somewhere else and with, 1-day delivery. So at this point, like to have to almost compete with your own platform, I think it's quite a big thing, and especially fashion on there. Like it's not something that is regularly priced down on like Prime days in any big way. I think a lot of retailers still tend to save their best discounts for their own websites.
Yeah, it is funny. Exactly like you said, I think Amazon used to be the place you'd go where if you didn't care about the quality being that high and you just wanted something cheap, you'd go to Amazon. And now it's like there's even cheaper, even lower quality alternatives. It's interesting that Haul is only available on mobile. You can browse it on the Amazon app or on mobile web. You cannot actually look at Haul on a computer. And I was thinking about how I think we talked about this last week, but a lot of shopping apps I think are starting to take a lot of inspiration, and particularly the kind of like addictive tendencies from mobile games, from sports betting, from that kind of world, which is very mobile based because your phone is already like the most addictive like device ever created. It's already so much about it is already geared toward making you use it all the time, making you check it all the time. It's in your pocket at any moment. So it's interesting that they kind of explicitly don't allow you to shop Haul on the desktop version of Amazon, which I feel like would be very easy for them to do. So it definitely seems like an intentional choice rather than any sort of like technical limitation. But I've heard people say, and I kind of feel this way too, that sometimes if you make a big purchase, you're like, I got to get on my computer for this one. Like it's too expensive. Feels, you know what I mean? Feels weird to do it on my phone when it's like so much money, even though it's fundamentally the same. And this is kind of the opposite of that, where it's like, it's so cheap and you have it just on your phone. You can like, go to the bathroom, open it up and like buy 5 things and then leave. They make it as absolutely easy and convenient and tempting as possible.
Yeah, definitely. And obviously, with mobile apps as well, you get that notifications aspect, which is also a
Hmm.
big reason why I guess people would be able to tap into limited time discounts or, offers that are
Hmm.
happening that day. Even with email, my guess, and this is very much a guess, not anything like based on specific data, but I think that even email opens, considering the amount of emails that most people get nowadays from brands, like I still think those notifications will probably be slightly more tailored. And also the other thing, and this is kind of more broadly speaking about, the kind of data that you get from browsing behavior, which obviously you do get a lot from a desktop shopping kind of behavior. People can see where you click, what you're doing. But obviously, if it's a mobile app, that data is almost even better because you're going directly to the brand and they own all of that data because it's their app. So essentially, it gives them better purchasing behavior understanding. And it means that all of that stuff is even more, I guess, tied in and explicit to your browsing behavior on your phone, which, as you said, like most people do tend to do smaller
Hmm.
purchases on there. And I think that, with the fact that like Klarna is so well integrated with mobile apps nowadays, and even with like mobile browsing, even on web, like all of those things are making it so much more easy to just shop on your phone rather than your desktop.
Yeah, and it also encourages people to download the app, like you said, because the mobile web still to this day is like kind of not a great experience. Like opening a browser on your phone and going to a website. It's like I do it all the time, but it's definitely not as a smooth experience as using an app. But then the flip side is I don't want to have a separate app for every single thing I want to do. And I like kind of resist downloading new apps. I'm like, I've got all the apps that I want. But for Amazon, like if you make this super cheap, super tempting thing only available through your app, that definitely I'm sure is meant to drive up some app downloads. They do a lot of other kind of interesting things just from browsing around a little bit. There is no Prime free shipping. So even if you're a Prime member, you have to pay for shipping unless you buy $25 worth of stuff. And then you get free shipping for the order. 25 is pretty low. I feel like a lot of websites that I've used put the free shipping tier at like $50. I think the place where I
Mm.
order my like pet food is as like a $50 free shipping tier. Amazon haul is very low, and if you're buying something for like $2 or $3, and then you see it's like you only got to add like another $20 or something to get the free shipping. And I didn't look at how much the shipping would be if you don't do that, but I feel like that's so low that it's really tempting to like, just throw in another couple of random things in there to hit the $25 mark. So I'm sure there was a lot of internal testing and data of like, where do we put the free shipping line at? Is it $30? Is it $20? And 25 seems like the perfect amount where it's like, well, the other thing is nothing is over $20. So you cannot get the free shipping off one item. So like you'd have to get two, at the very least. And probably most stuff that you would get there, if it's average of like $10, you're already halfway or almost halfway to getting the free shipping. You see the psychology I feel like that has gone into this is so interesting.
Oh yeah, definitely. Like if you're talking about, all of the dark pattern stuff that we were talking about on the podcast last week, I think that this is almost playing into that behavior, except, with shipping minimums, like you have to make essentially more than one purchase just to have that free shipping, which by default nowadays, I think people still do expect because of, all of the times that retailers did offer free shipping. And I think a lot of people still want that. I did actually check out Amazon and there was like no marketing or like pop up saying go to haul anywhere. So I'm wondering if this is still something that's quite like soft launch, or maybe if they're looking at just like doing it as a mobile only kind of thing. Because obviously I've seen like the press releases and everything that it's live, but I don't feel like Amazon is necessarily marketing it on their own site, which is quite interesting because usually you'd, kind of cross pollinate if you have both platforms.
Yeah, I agree. When I looked for it, I had to type in haul
Mm.
on the Amazon mobile app to get it to come up. I swiped through the home screen to see if there was some banner or something kind of like directing people to it. And you're right, there was not that I saw.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm curious to see how they'll market it. Maybe the idea is that it's so bare bones and so cheap that they're like not even going to spend much on marketing and just hope the price alone will draw people in. But it's
Mm.
interesting. I feel like it's kind of like the opposite of what so many people like say or have told me the fashion industry needs to be doing and the retail industry, which is like moving toward like fewer, better, higher quality things that you pay more for, but then you have them for a long time. And this is the exact opposite. It's like spend $1 on some garbage that you'll throw away in like a couple weeks. The other interesting thing is like it's an interesting timing for Amazon to launch this, because there has been a lot of scrutiny on like importing super cheap stuff from mostly like a lot of Chinese like warehouses and manufacturers. Before the election, the Biden administration was targeting the de minimis exemption, which we've talked about, which is like the rule that says imports into the country under a certain dollar value don't have to pay import duties. And so companies like Shein, because it's so cheap, were avoiding that. The Biden administration was trying to end that. Trump is now elected, and he has been very clear about putting very harsh tariffs on stuff imported from China. So it's like right as that those headlines are coming out, Amazon is like, we're going all in on cheap stuff imported from China. So I am interested to see if that's like unfortunate timing, or if they kind of knew and they've worked out the math and that's fine, or what. But it does seem interesting.
Yeah, definitely. I'm kind of thinking about the like logistics side of it, because obviously if this is coming from under the Amazon arm of things, does that mean that they're going to be using their existing, supply chain and shipping? Is that going to mean also that they're going to be able to bundle up goods with Amazon goods and therefore either, exempt themselves from the de minimis and therefore be able to maybe pay like a bulk tariff or like something for their goods? I don't know if they're trying to see if they're going to be able to get under that catchment term, because I think de minimis is still in action, right? I don't think it's been.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, so I think that there's still some time before that's actually going to be legally passed. And then on the other side, obviously, those bulk packages typically are cheaper for companies to get through as well. So I'm wondering, how are they going to navigate this, especially, going to the US, where I think at the moment most of the customer base for like Temu and Haul would be based in.
Yeah, for sure. I think that our third topic today, when we talk about Klarna, is going to touch on a lot of the same topics that we're talking about with Amazon Haul. But let's take a quick detour and talk about kind of a loose topic, but just I feel like there's a lot of interesting things happening in sportswear and activewear. I wrote a little bit about Viore last week and the humongous amount of funding that they just got. But I believe you also talked to the co-CEO of On Running today. How did that go?
Yeah, so Mark, who's the co-CEO of On, spoke a little bit about the earnings that came out earlier this week. And obviously On has done very well for itself. I think it's boosted its revenues by like 20%, and they're not looking at cost cutting at all, which, considering their premium segmentation in the activewear space, is quite interesting. They've had a lot of very kind of premium or high-end collaborations, the most notable of which is the one with Loewe that happened earlier this year. I think that, they've been positioning themselves with that kind of luxury angle for quite a while now, and it looks like they're going to be pushing into it a little bit more. So out of that conversation, which I'm hoping to kind of wrap up in a bigger piece, but it looks like they're kind of moving a little bit away from their sneaker line, obviously not forgetting about the technology that they've had implemented this year with the kind of new trainer that they've got, but also kind of focusing a little bit more on athletic wear, gym wear, because that's apparently a new area for them. They've done running, so they're kind of moving into other things, as well as kind of trail. So things like, walking, hiking, that's kind of been a big boost for a lot of their competitors, including Adidas. So I'm wondering, if that's something that they're also going to be putting a little bit of a fashion spin on, because they've said that they're going to have quite a few extended collaborations. None of the collaborations they've done so far are kind of a one-off thing. So they're going to be doing multiple collaborations over the next couple of years. And then obviously the last thing is a bigger focus on D2C and Asia. They still see a lot of interest and I guess expansion from the Asian market, specifically Japan and Korea, which I think has been doing the rounds again in beauty, but it seems like fashion, it's always kind of in the mix somewhere.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff in there, but I think the first thing is just On and another one is Hoka, who I was looking into recently, are just, I feel like, two sneaker and kind of athletic brands that have really been blowing up in the last couple of years. Hoka, I just looked at, they also had earnings, I think, last week, and their revenue grew like 35% year over year. So it definitely feels like there's an appetite for kind of newer sneaker and sportswear brands that are not just Nike and Adidas. Interesting that you say that they're kind of moving, that On is moving a little bit away from just running, because my impression of them a couple of years ago, I remember I wrote about, I think they had opened their first like flagship store in Manhattan in like 2020 or 2021 or something. I'm not a huge runner, but I have several friends who are like competitive runners. And On is, I think my impression was that they're a runner's runner brand, like really like high-end running shoes, not at the time, not as interested in like lifestyle and other stuff. They're like really focused on like super technical, high performance, like running stuff. And I think it's inevitable. They're a publicly traded company who've been growing a lot, that they expand. I think that's natural. But I do wonder sometimes, not necessarily about On, but just in general, when a company starts with like a super specific focus on one type of product, and then they get really successful in that and they start to grow, and they're like, well, we have to like become an all-in-one sportswear brand or something instead of just sneakers. Like, for example, I think Allbirds kind of went down that route, and that did not work out for them. It turned out that people did not really want to buy activewear from Allbirds. They just wanted the sneakers. I think On is probably is better set up to expand than some other brands, but I don't know. What do you think about that? Like, do you feel like they can do that, and is that possible?
I mean, I think that you have to kind of look at their second collaboration with Post Archive Faction, which is a Korean brand, to kind of understand what direction they're going in. Like, I think if the best way to describe it is what Stone Island did for like Gore-Tex and like making all of that athletic, but I would say like, outdoor wear kind of specific technical garments and technical kind of pieces, all of that performance wear aspect. I think what Stone Island did for that, and kind of how they brought fashion into it and kind of made it a little bit more style based, I think this is now what On is trying to do within that sneaker space, and then expanding out into, bring that athletic wear into other areas. So, they talked about, or Mark talked a little bit about how they collaborated with Loewe. Like, it was a very kind of like organic thing where their creative director was approached by Loewe, and that was the first time they actually like ceded creative control. So it was more about that design aspect. And even the Post Archive Faction collaboration, the actual, I guess, design of the sneaker changed as well. So I think they're trying to keep that kind of technical element side of things and focusing on their materials, their like proprietary technology, the soles, and then bringing in these like interesting brands that haven't really done collaborations before, or have something really unique to offer for a very specific market. They kind of talked about being very, very specific in terms of what kinds of collaboration they're doing, and definitely making sure it's not something that's a one-off. We've heard a lot, in especially over the last couple of weeks, is the collaboration thing too much? And I think that On has been one of those brands this year, at least, that has done that in a very like different way, in the fact that they're looking at it as like a long-term collaboration with both of these brands. I think it just means that like that's the model to follow, and that's kind of how to bring these like athletic and fashion gear things into perspective. I'm interested to see what they're going to be doing with garments, because obviously that's, I would say, their secondary field, but it seems like they've got some good ideas and good direction there.
Yeah, and it is a big leap from footwear to apparel, or vice versa. And it's two categories that I think are like, they're similar on the consumer end. Like you might buy a pair of sneakers and a pair of running shorts, but on the manufacturing end, they're like very, very different. So it's some categories that seem like they'd make a perfect fit for one company to do both from the consumer side. On the back end are actually like very specialized. I've heard that shoes and sneakers in general just have a lot of moving parts and are quite complex. So it's different like manufacturing skill. But yeah, I think On is a really cool brand, and like I'm interested to see how they expand and if they can do so smartly. On the flip side, another one I wanted to quickly talk about, I already wrote about Vuori on the website, so if you want to read more in depth, that's on Glossy, so I won't talk about it too much. But Vuori, I think, is an interesting brand because I think they launched without like a single product or category that's like their main focus beyond just activewear. So I think they're more kind of like better set up to kind of expand in all directions. But a couple of years ago, they raised like $400 million from SoftBank and a couple other investors, which was a huge funding round. I think at the time it was like the largest single funding round for a private apparel brand, I think. And I wrote about it at the time, like, that's so much money. Then last week they raised like $845 million from a couple more investors, which is truly an insane amount of money. They're now worth like $5.5 billion. And like, no offense to Viore, because I own some of their stuff and like I like the product, but I'm like, who is buying all this Viore? Like, is this, it has to be based on real demand, because I've heard countless times from brands and founders recently that like nobody's getting investment right now. Like, unless you say the word AI in your pitch, like investors are just being like very cautious. So like, how is Viore getting so much funding? Like, that's insane. They're clearly like, they're doing something right. Like, I don't think it's just speculative. I do think there's demand. Like, I feel like they've become a little bit more of a household name compared to a couple of years ago. So it's not like there's some random obscure brand. But it is definitely surprising just the amount of cash flowing into that company. I am actually hoping to talk to one of their investors this week. So I may get some more insight about what they saw in the brand, but I will report back once I do that.
Yeah, I think Fiore is really interesting. And as you mentioned, I wouldn't say, the product is, I think, is very good, but I don't know if it would be something which, is revolutionary in that market, especially considering how saturated that space is. I think like if you look at it as more of a gender neutral, like Lululemon, for example, which I think has had a little bit of a tougher time, I guess, expanding that premium proposition. I think that their like branding and their aesthetic, like Viore, seems to have a much more kind of neutral take on all of it. And in some ways, I do actually think that's quite similar to what On is doing. Like, it's impactful in very certain ways, but on the most part, it's actually very neutral. And it doesn't seem to have, any kind of like shouty branding. It's not particularly premium. It just feels almost like the way that you'd market a luxury brand. And I think that the pricing is relatively reflective of that as well. It seems like it sits quite high in that like athletic gear category.
So our last topic, I think, will kind of overlap a little bit with things we've talked about actually in both of our previous topics. But Klarna, speaking of things that SoftBank has invested in, this week the buy now pay later app Klarna said it had filed for an IPO in the US. At its peak during the pandemic, I think it was valued at like 15 billion. It's now down to like 6.7 billion, which is still quite a lot. But I feel like the buy now pay later apps, Klarna, Afterpay, in the post-pandemic era, maybe not even post-pandemic, mid-pandemic, like 2021 through 2023, grew an insane amount. I think I saw that the amount of loans through buy now pay later apps grew like 1,100%, I think, in those 3 or 4 years there. These companies have been around for a little while. I think Klarna was founded in like 2005 or something, but it really feels like they've rocketed into popularity in the last couple of years. But yeah, I'm wondering, like, Zofia, what you think is behind some of that popularity? And like, it does feel like it's a little bit on the come down now and maybe just not growing as much, but it's still a huge amount of people are using these. And I have some thoughts about whether that's good and some of the dark pattern kind of things we talked about before. But just to start, like, why do you think so many people are using buy now, pay later now?
I think, obviously the main reason is the fact that obviously it doesn't perform a credit check when you apply for any of these. So it's not something as formal as an official loan that you'd get from a bank. Most of the times the options that Klarna gives is, either you pay in 30 days, so it delays payments, or it splits up those payments into 3 or more. And, Klarna's not the only one. There's like ClearPay and others. So it's basically like a split of all of those bigger ticket items. And to be honest, based on, how badly things have been doing in the UK, I've seen people put trips on, for example, on Klarna so that they don't have to pay for, a big purchase like a plane ticket all in one go. It's just become a very universal way of, I think, mostly splitting payments or delaying payments. Obviously, at the same time, Klarna is also one of those companies that has its own app. It's recently bought out, I think it's membership cards, at least in the UK. All of the ones that I used to have basically on my phone as like a separate app to collect points from various retailers are now all on Klarna. So I feel like they're kind of expanding into both those like membership point systems as well as all of those like buy now, pay later things. So it's not just about, I guess, the purchases, because obviously that's their biggest business. And I think that's where they've grown the most. but also, all of these extra services that they're offering now. I think that a lot of the times people also search out discounts through Klarna because you can see who your like favorite retailers are on there and if they have any discounts going on. So I feel like, they're trying to do a lot of things. And I'm wondering if that in itself might be something which has shrunk that valuation a little bit because they're not quite as focused as what they were doing before.
Yeah, they're really interesting. And I know they're not going to like me for describing it this way, but I do think like the loans, their like micro loans are a little bit predatory, just in the same reason that like having sports betting apps available on your phone at any time is a little predatory because it just makes gambling very easy. Having a instant loan with no credit check or anything available to you at all times, I'm sure enables some unhealthy spending habits. The other thing is that the credit score thing is interesting because if I remember correctly, it doesn't require, a lot of them don't require a credit check to receive the loan. And if you pay it back, then it's like doesn't get reported to the credit bureaus at all. But if you don't pay it back, then it does get reported and then it will negatively affect your credit score. So it's sort of like it can only hurt your credit score. Like you can't get any benefit of taking out the loan and paying it back the way you would like a normal loan, but you can get the negatives of not paying it back. So it's kind of an interesting regulatory issue around these apps. And I know there's been some push to kind of try to regulate them a little more. I doubt any of that is going to go very far under a Trump administration. I don't know. I feel like they're unmonitorable, a lot of them too, like the amount of debt that is floating around in the various buy now pay later apps. A lot of them don't report it anywhere, so it's hard to gauge exactly how much debt there is in the US because of a lot of it is just hidden. But I did look up some statistics that in general, household debt in the US is growing a lot. It increased by $147 billion in the last quarter, and like 3.5% of all household debt is in some state of delinquency. So basically, Americans are taking on more debt and then failing to pay it back more frequently. And I feel like just having a super accessible microloan in your pocket at any moment is, I don't know, I'm sure that's not good for those statistics.
Yeah, definitely. And obviously Klarna's also come out with its own, I guess, kind of like a credit card that does work at retailers as well. So I think that, they're expanding into that area too, which also increases that debt amount. I think that, with, I guess, so much financial illiteracy around traditional loans, I think most people are probably quite worried about, taking out bigger loans with banks and obviously having that kind of credit check aspect there. And so therefore these, buy now, pay later or delayed payment apps like Klarna or ClearPay, they have really grown as a result. And a lot of that is because of consumer spending on categories like retail, something like fashion, for example. It's very easy to integrate on D2C sites. I think for a lot of brands, it makes for a kind of a subset of customers who probably can't afford that purchase in one go, but it allows them to enter that I guess that retailer's world or that brand's world just by being able to pay in through installments.
Yeah, for sure. One thing that I think might change with Klarna going public is hopefully the public will get a little more visibility into exactly how the business works and how much debt they are holding for people, just because they're going to have to report some of that stuff financially. So that's like maybe one benefit of Klarna going public is that we'll just get a little bit more visibility into how they work. But just in general, I'm like, they don't make money unless people don't pay it back. There's like where there's loans, there's debt. And like, I think that buy now, pay later to me feels like a lot of kind of recent tech developments where it's like reinventing something that exists but is regulated in a new unregulated way, much like Uber was like, what if we redid taxis except without all of the like decades of regulation and standards and conditions that have been put on the taxi industry? What if we just like make something that's exactly the same but without any of that, then grow really big as fast as possible before any regulation goes into effect, and then lobby to shape that regulation with all of the money we have? So, and that's maybe a little bit cynical, but the playbook has been used many times. Airbnb did exactly the same thing. That I kind of sense that same sort of strategy from some of these companies too.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's only going to keep growing because obviously that cost of living is going up, even in places like the US. You've had rental increases, you've had bill increases. Like all of these things are going to contribute to people having less money to spend on maybe some more kind of consumer kind of retail categories. But at the same time, people aren't going to shop less because they're used to a certain standard of living. So it's kind of a growing problem. It's kind of like what, countries' debt looks like, except on a personal level.
Yeah, absolutely. And for our brands listening, I mean, I think a lot of them do use buy now, pay later apps. And I'm sure that they've got opinions on how they work and if it's useful for them. So if anyone listening, if you use these apps on your website, like I'd love to hear your thoughts on what's useful about it for you. I think that's all the time we have. But Zofia, it's always a great time having you on the podcast. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much. It was so fun.
For those of you listening, don't forget to give us a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, wherever you listen to this podcast, because that helps us out a ton. And don't forget to subscribe to the Glossy Podcast, because you'll hear interviews with industry insiders every Wednesday and weekend review episodes every Friday. Until next time, thank you all for listening.